Okay, good morning. So, are there any questions about what we were discussing in the last class? There were some questions yesterday about the tutorials. We cannot have the tutorials in the lab slot because there are some students who are doing the theory course, but they have some other course in the lab slot. It's mainly students from other departments. Okay, so we need to have it in one of the D slot lecture hours, right? So one suggestion is to have it on Thursdays from 12 to 1. Okay, so if that's fine with all of you, we'll try to schedule the tutorials on Thursdays between 12 and 1, so that now you'll have some time after the tutorial to scan and upload the answer sheets. This was one problem when we had the last tutorial from 9 to 10, because we had some other class after that, right? There was some difficulty in uploading the scanned files in the grade scope. Okay, so is that fine with everyone to have the tutorials on Thursdays? We will not have on every Thursday. Whenever you want to have a tutorial in that week, we'll have it on Thursdays between 12 and 1. Because I don't want to lose the regular lecture hours to conduct the tutorials. So is that fine, everyone? Yeah. Okay, Vikram says it's okay. Please let me know if there is an issue, and we'll have the next tutorial on next Thursday, not this Thursday, on the next Thursday, that will be 8th of October. Okay. Okay, let's get started with the discussion for today's class. So we finished the discussions on the design of combinational circuits. So mainly we have seen how to design the modular circuits like multiplexers, demultiplexers, encoders, decoders, and so on. Then design of circuits for integer arithmetic operations, both for unsigned and signed. And the last few classes we've been looking at design of circuits for the arithmetic operations on the floating point representations of the real valued numbers. Okay. Uh, so with the circuits that we have designed, including the division circuit, which we are not discussed, right? One should be able to design what are called the arithmetic and logic units, right? Which will typically have two modules, the integer unit and the floating point unit. And the integer unit will take care of all the arithmetic operations on the unsigned and signed integers. And also typically the integer unit will also take care of the logical operations like the AND or exclusive or compare and so on. And there'll be typically a separate unit called the floating point unit, which takes care of the arithmetic operations on the different types of floating point representations of the real data. And most of the processors support the single precision, that is the 32-bit data type, called as a float in the C language, and the 64-bit representation called as the double in the C language. Okay, so all the four arithmetic operations will be supported by the floating point unit. So you put the circuits for all these four operations for each of the types, like float and the double type, that will form the floating point unit, right? And both this integer unit and floating point unit put together is what is called as the arithmetic and logic unit, which forms the main part of the central processing unit, which is normally called as a processor. And there'll be what is called a control unit, which controls all the operations within the processor. We'll be discussing that in some detail later in the course, but more in detail in the next course that we'll be doing. Okay. Before we close the discussion on this and then move on to the other type of digital circuits called the sequential circuits, let us see briefly about the representation of other type of data, what you have looked at is only the representation of the numerical data, which can be in the form of the integers or in the form of the real numbers. But we also may have to deal with the other types of data. Other commonly used types of data are the character data or the text data, and also what are called the analog data, which are in the form of the signals like audio signals, images, or video, or any other typically physical signals, or what are called the real world data. Okay, so we'll briefly look at how these kinds of data get represented in a computer system. And as it turns out, we'll be seeing that, right, all these types of data will be getting represented as some form of numbers or the numeric data. And whatever circuits that you are designed in the integer unit and the floating point unit typically will be used for processing even the character data and the signal data. So if you take the character data, initially the representation has been available only for the alphabet in English, and that's what was kind of a standard. The standard is what is known as the ASCII standard, where ASCII stands for American Standard Code for Information Interchange, and it's an 8-bit code. So there are 128 symbols that can be represented using this 8-bit code. So basically every character that gets represented will take 8 bits or 1 byte. All right, and some of the commonly used symbols by us are the digit symbols like 0 to 9, and the ASCII code for these symbols 0 to 9 are 30 in hexadecimal to 39H for the digit 9. And we give this ASCII code in the hexadecimal code. It's only for the convenience, but basically it's a bit sequence. So the digits 0 to 9 get represented as 30H to 39H. And the uppercase letters of English alphabet, capital A to capital Z, have the ASCII codes starting from 41H, that's decimal 65, to 5AH, that's 19 the decimal. And the lowercase letters A to Z start from 61 in hexadecimal to 7A in the hexadecimal. Okay, actually you can see that these representations will be typically useful, right, when you want to perform the operations like comparing the strings, right, or comparing the numbers which are represented in the ASCII form, right, and one can do the sorting of the data, right, basically on the representations of each of the characters in the string data by using this ASCII code. So typically whenever you enter a particular character using a keyboard, right, into a computer system, first what gets loaded is what is called this ASCII code. So whenever you press, let's say the keyboard key for the uppercase letter capital A, right, then the information about that key is stored as this 41H in the memory, and then that will be processed by the whatever the software that you are trying to use, right, for processing the text data, right. So basically whenever you press any key on the keyboard, right, what gets stored is the corresponding ASCII code of the character that's associated with that key, right. And also, of course, this takes care of only 10 digits, and then 26 uppercase letters and 26 lowercase letters, right. Then there are so many other codes that are available in the 8-bit code, which are used to represent the special symbols like operators, space, and so many punctuation symbols, and so on, right. You can refer to any book, or you can even get the ASCII code in the net, right, to get the complete list of characters or the symbols that are represented by this ASCII code. And nowadays, with the use of computers for many other languages as well, there is another standard that has emerged, which is called as the Unicode standard for encoding the characters of several languages. And one of the Unicodes that's currently being used is what is known as the Universal Character Set Transformation Format, and it stands for shortly UTF, right? And there are different versions of this UTF. UTF-8 is the first version that was proposed. And this UTF-8 typically uses 1 to 6 bits per character. Typically, ASCII code is a part of this UTF code. So basically, all the English alphabet get represented using only 1 byte, but the characters of the other languages may get represented using 1 or more bytes, depending on the format that's used. Then there is a revision of this UTF code called as the UTF-16, which proposes 2 or 4 bytes per character. And there is also UTF-32, which is not being used that extensively because it uses a fixed number of bytes per character. That's 4 bytes per character, which is kind of considered to be inefficient. So most of the current day systems, which want to represent the characters of multiple languages, they go for this UTF-16. And basically, what you are trying to note here is that every character is represented by 1 or more bytes, and typically this bit sequence in these bytes are considered as unsigned integers, right? So we can use the circuits that are built for the unsigned integer data to process the representation of the characters as the unsigned numbers, and then perform whatever are the operations that we are typically interested in, like comparing, right, or any other manipulation that you want to do, right? So basically, even the characters get represented as numbers, and then we use the same ALU, or basically the integer unit, to perform the processing on the data which contains these characters. Okay, I'm not going into the details of this UTF. Please look into the sources, right, where you can get more details if you are really interested in. Okay, but this UTF can be used to encode characters of several languages that exist in the world. Okay, yeah. Are there any questions about that? Okay. Okay. The other type of data that we may be interested in, basically in the current day world, right? We are interested in typically what is called the multimedia data. Typically, whenever you say multimedia, it includes the text, then audio, image, and video types of data. And these are all typically referred to as what are called the analog data, because audio data is typically that is taken from the output of a microphone. Basically, the pressure variations are converted into the electrical signals, and then we process these analog signals to convert them into the digital data, and then we store the information about this audio data, right? And similarly, when you take the picture, right, especially nowadays using the digital camera, right, the image is represented as a set of pixels, and the information about each pixel is again stored using certain format, right? Again, there are a number of formats that are used for the representation of the image. And typically, video is a sequence of frames where every frame is an image, right? So basically, a video will be represented as a number of images, where each image is in turn represented as a set of pixels, right? So typically, when we deal with analog signals, and then when we want to store the data of these analog signals in a computer system in the digital format, typically there will be 2 steps. The first step is what is called the sampling, and the second step is what is called the quantization. So in the case of the analog signals, so typically if we take, let's say, the audio data, or more specifically the speech data, the waveform may look like this, right? So this is time versus amplitude, which when it's converted into a electrical signal, it may represent the variation of the voltage. And this is a continuous signal, right? And when you want to represent this signal in a computer system, we have to store it in a discrete form. So typically, we sample this signal at a particular rate, right? So typically, the speech data is sampled at 10,000 samples per second, or it can be 8,000 samples per second, right? So for every second we get, let's 10,000 samples, then every sample is represented by one number. This one number can be either 1 byte or 2 bytes, right? It all depends on what is the level of quantization that you want to have. Let's say the voltage levels are between -5 to plus 5 volts. Then how many discrete intervals of these voltage levels that you want to have is decided by 1 byte or 2 bytes. If it's only 1 byte, then -5 volts to plus 5 volts will be represented using 0 to 255. Otherwise, if it's 2 bytes, it is represented between 0 and 2 power 16 minus 1. Okay. So basically what we are trying to say here is that even the analog data like the speech data or the audio data will be represented as a sequence of numbers where the number of numbers in the sequence is dependent on the sampling rate that's typically used. You must be knowing about what is called the Nyquist criteria, which suggests that the sampling rate should be at least double the highest frequency of the component in the signal. Okay, again, those who are in the electrical engineering will be familiar with that. So typically for the audio data or the speech data, 10,000 samples per second is good enough. But for the music data, it can be even 20,000 samples per second or even more than that, right? And then when you try to represent every sample with 1 byte, right? For 10,000 samples, it requires 10,000 bytes per second data to be used. Right? If it's 2 bytes, then it's 20,000 bytes to be used for storing 1 second of the audio data. Okay. Again, I'm just giving you some gross details. Those who are interested can go into the details of this process of conversion of analog signals to the digital signals. There are what are called the analog to digital converters, typically used in a computer system, which takes the audio data as the input and then converts into the digital representation, where it is in terms of number of samples, then 1 or 2 bytes per sample. So this is for the audio data. And for image data, as all of you know, typically we specify an image in terms of the number of pixels, right? Let us say it is 1024 by 1024 pixels, which is normally referred to as 1 M pixels per image, right? I mean, that's how the camera specifications are given, right? It's 1 M pixels or multiples of million pixels, right? And then every pixel information is stored depending on the type of the image that we are dealing with, right? If it is only black and white image, then it's only 1 bit per pixel. This is for the black and white, because you need to tell whether a particular pixel is black or white. Okay. Whereas if it's a gray level image of a single color, basically, right, then typically one may use more than that, right? So typically one may use, let's say, 8 bits per pixel. This is for the gray level image. So every pixel will be represented as 8 bits. So there are 256 gray levels, right? So each level will be indicated as a particular combination of these 8 bits. And when it comes to the color images, as you might already know, right, there are 3 primary colors, right? That is the red, green, and blue. So for every pixel, we need to indicate the intensity of each of these colors, right? So intensity of the red color, intensity of the green color, intensity of the blue color, a combination of which gives the color for that pixel, right? So typically, if you use 256 levels of intensity for each of the colors, right, then it takes minimum of 3 bytes per pixel to store the color information. So typically, whenever we say we are processing a color image, right, then we are talking about 3 channels, the primary color channels, red, green, and blue. Then for each channel, there will be so many number of pixels, that is 1024 by 1024 pixels, right? Let's say. Then there are 1 megapixels for each color channel, right? Then in order to store one image of 1 megapixels, we need to use 3 megabytes of storage to store one image, right? So this is where the storage requirements are going to be very heavy, right? So that's where there's a lot of work that's done to compress these images without losing the quality, right? So there are many compression standards like JPEG and so on, right? So that will reduce the number of pixels to be used to store the image, or number of bits to be used to store the image without a significant loss of the content. Okay, so this is for the image, and again, each of these intensity levels will be considered as a unsigned integer, right? So it will take 0 to 255, right? And processing of the data basically involves processing these numbers, right? Where the numbers represent the information in the pixel or information in the sample for an audio signal. And when it comes to the video data, again, as all of you might be knowing, right? A video can be considered as a sequence of frames, right? And there are different rates at which you can have the frames. So maybe 25 frames per second, right? And what is in each frame here? Each frame is a typically a color image, and if each color image is represented using 1K by 1K pixels, right? Now we can see that to represent 1 second of video, you require 75 megabytes of storage, because there are 25 frames and each frame has got 1 M pixels, and each pixel is represented by 3 bytes, right? So totally it will require 75 megabytes to store 1 second of video data. So obviously it takes quite a bit of storage, and there are a number of compression methods that are used, like MPEG and so on, right, to reduce the storage space that's taken by the video. So basically, all these compression methods try to look at the redundant information that's present in the data, and then try to come up with the compression where that redundancy can be taken away as much as possible, but without compromising on the quality of the data, so that from the compressed representation you can get the reconstructed version, which is more or less close to the original version, right? So typically, what is processed in a computer system is the compressed versions of the audio data or the image data or the video data, right? And the typical processing involves the arithmetic operations on the unsigned integer representations of either the samples or the pixels in the image or pixels in a frame of the video. Okay, so now what we see is that globally, if you look at either the unsigned integer data or the character data or the analog signal data, all of them get represented as bit sequences that represent the unsigned integers, right? So the circuits that are built for arithmetic operations on the unsigned integer data can be typically used for processing all these types of data, right? So that's why we don't have the different circuits for processing the character data and different circuits for processing this audio data, image data, or video data in any computer system, right? All of them will get represented as unsigned integers, right? Then we use the same integer unit to perform the necessary processing on that. Okay. Yeah. Are there any questions about that? Yeah. Are there any other types of data that need to be discussed? Okay. So typically, any type of data, I mean, I'm talking about the physical world data, right? There will be a transducer which converts the data from one form to the digital form or the electrical form, and then you do the conversion to digital. So in the case of the audio data, it's a microphone is the transducer. In the case of the images and videos, right, it's a camera which performs this transduction operation, which converts the original analog signal into the electrical signal, and then we use the analog to digital converter to represent these analog signals in the digital form, right? And we do all the processing on the digital representations of the data. Okay. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Okay, there are no other questions. Let's move on to the next topic. Called the sequential circuits. This is another set of digital logic circuits which are extensively used in the computers. And as we quickly saying, it's used for many purposes, starting from design of counters, and then what are called the memory storage elements like registers or physical memory unit, and so on. Right. So we'll look at some basic elements of these sequential circuits. And then we'll try to understand why this name called the sequential circuits are given to this kind of circuits. Then we look at a few applications of these sequential circuits for some of the commonly used tasks in the computer system. And interestingly, the basic elements in these sequential circuits, which are called the flip-flops, is also built using the logic gates. And unlike in the combination circuits, where typically the outputs of one gate will go on to as the inputs of the next level of gates, and this continues in a kind of a feed-forward fashion, right, until we get the output of the overall circuit, right. We'll be seeing that in the sequential circuits, though we'll be using the gates, there will be some kind of a feedback connection, and this feedback connection is what is helping us to realize the main characteristic of the sequential circuits called as the memory or the storage of data. Okay, so we'll first look at the basic flip-flop element, right? Then try to understand what is this feedback connection and how it is helping us to use this flip-flop as one bit storage element, right? And then we'll look at how to make use of these flip-flops in order to design what are called the synchronous sequential circuits a little later. Okay, so let's look at a very simple circuit that's built using two NOR gates. Yeah, please follow this carefully because understanding this is very, very important for the whole of the discussion on the sequential circuits. So I have two logic gates, which are NOR gates, right? Let's say I call this input as some S. We'll quickly see why it's called S. Then there is another input that will be coming. We'll mark it later. Then the output of this NOR gate goes as input to the second OR gate that we have here, right? Then there is another external input, which we call it as the OR, right? And the output of the second NOR gate is what we call as the output of the circuit here, which is denoted by Q, right? If it is only this kind of a circuit, then it's very easy for us to analyze the circuit. If we specify what are all the inputs here, this is S and R, then one additional input there, right? Then we can easily determine what is the value of Q for the given combinations of SR and this other input signal, right? But what you are going to look at is, if I take this output of this second NOR gate and then give it as input to the first NOR gate, right? So now we want to see how this circuit will behave. Okay, so now we can see that there is a feedback connection where the output of this second gate goes back as input to the first gate, and we see that the output of the first gate goes as input to the second gate, right? So there is a kind of a feedback within the circuit. Just for the analysis purposes, let us call the output of this first NOR gate as some P, right? We'll change that little later. Okay, yeah. Now let's see what happens when we give certain values for these external inputs S and R. Okay, so let's say I make S equal to 1 and R equal to 0. right? So when S equal to 1 and R equal to 0, what will be the values of P and Q is what we are interested in. What is an NOR gate? As all of you know, the NOR gate is X plus Y complement, right? So if I call this as some Z, right? If X is 1 or Y is 1, or if both of them are also 1, right? Then Z will be equal to 0, right? Only when both X and Y are 0, right? The Z will be 1, right? That's the way the output of the NOR gate is going to be, right? So now we see that one of the inputs to this first NOR gate, S equal to 1, right? Now with respect to what the other input is, right? The output of this first NOR gate is going to be 0, right? With respect to what is the value of Q, current value of Q that goes as input to the first NOR gate, right? The P is going to be 0 because S is equal to 1. Now, because P equal to 0 and R is 0, what will be the Q? Q will turn out to be 1. Right? So, what is happening now? Whenever we give S equal to 1 and R equal to 0, the P is becoming 0 and Q is equal to 1. And we see that the output of this whole circuit is set to 1. And as we'll be seeing later, we call this Q as the state of the flip-flop, right? So what is happening in this case is when S equal to 1 and R equal to 0 is the combination that we are giving as input to the circuit, right? The state of flip-flop is set to 1. That's why actually this S input is what is called the set input. Because whenever the set input is 1, the state of the flip-flop is set to 1. Now let's look at another combination, S equal to 0 and R equal to 1, right? Yeah. Now what will happen in this case? And the output of second NOR gate is going to be 0 because R equal to 1, irrespective of what the value of P is, right? Actually, these two operations are independent, right? We are not saying that we are giving this S equal to 0, R equal to 1 after S equal to 1 and R equal to 0, right? These two operations are kind of independent. So now at some point of time, if I give S equal to 0 and R equal to 1, right? Because R equal to 1, irrespective of what is the value of this P, the output Q will be equal to 0, right? And when Q is 0, both the inputs to the P, the first NOR gate are 0, right? Therefore, P will be equal to 1, right? Now, what is happening here? Whenever S equal to 0 and R equal to 1, irrespective of whatever is the current value of Q, it will be changing to 0. So now this operation is referred to as the state of the flop is reset to 0. That's why this R input is what is referred to as the reset input. So whenever the reset input is 1, the output of the circuit, that is the flip-flop, will become 0. Whenever S equal to 1, right, the output of the flip-flop will be equal to 1. That's why it's called the set operation. Otherwise, it's called the reset operation. Okay. Are there any questions about this? Actually, now you can see that in both these cases, P and Q are complement of each other, right? So we can say that P is Q complement. Okay. Yeah. Now we'll see very important operation of this circuit, right? When we make S equal to 0 and R equal to 0. Right? So when S is 0 and R is 0, what are the outputs of these two gates dependent on now? The output of the first NOR gate is dependent on the Q. Output of the second NOR gate is dependent on the P. Right? because now the S and R 0, or if S is 0 and R is 0, right, the outputs of the two NOR gates in the circuit are mainly determined by the values of P and Q. So now let's look at what happens for the different combinations of this P and Q, noting that P is a Q complement, right? So we look at these two combinations, right? Let's say currently P is 0 and Q equal to 1. When P is 0 and Q equal to 1, if you make S equal to 0 and R equal to 0, right, what is going to happen? Yeah. What are the inputs to the first NOR gate here? S and Q, right? And we see that S is 0 and Q equal to 1. So the P will be 0, right? And because P is 0 and R is also 0, right, the Q will be equal to 1. So what is it we see now? When we give this S equal to 0 and R equal to 0 as the external inputs, right, we see that there is no change in the P and Q values in the circuit, right? So we say that the state does not change. When did Q become 1? The Q might have become 1 when we give S equal to 1 and R equal to 0. After we give that, let's say, after some time, then we make S equal to 0 and R equal to 0, we see that that state of the circuit is retained and the state does not change. This is what is referred to as the memory characteristic of the circuit. Actually, we'll be seeing that even for the other combination, right, P equal to 1 and Q equal to 0, if S is 0 and R is 0, now what is going to happen? Now we can see that the second NOR gate, right, gets the inputs R and P is 1, so Q will be 0, right? And because Q is 0, S is also 0, right, P will be equal to 1, right? And this is same as what we have started with. So currently we had P equal to 1 and Q equal to 0, right? And when we change the S and R inputs to 0, 0, right, it will continue to be in the same state, right? So here also the state does not change. So what is this saying is that whenever S is equal to 0 and R equal to 0 combination is given as input to the external input to this flip-flop, right, the state remains unchanged. And whatever is the bit that's available at Q equal to 1 will continue to be available. And this is what is referred to as the memory property of the circuit. Then there may be questions about what will happen if S equal to 1 and R equal to 1, right? As we'll be quickly saying, it leads to an undesirable state, right? And we can analyze this easily. What happens when X equal to 1 and R equal to 1? P is 0 and Q is 0, obviously. Because when S is 1, irrespective of what is the other input, P is 1, right? And when R is 1, irrespective of what is the value of P, right, the Q is going to be 0, right? And actually here it defines the property that's desired between P and Q, that P should be the complement of Q. That's not very important, but more important thing is that we'll be seeing that this S equal to 1 and R equal to 1 can lead to what is known as the oscillating state of the circuit, right? In order to understand that, let's say after we make S equal to 1 and R equal to 1, P is 0 and Q is 0. Now if you set, let's say, S equal to 0 and R equal to 0, right? Yeah. What will happen to the P and Q here? P is 0 and Q is 0 now, right? So now you tell me what will be the change in the P and Q if we make S is 0 and R is 0, right? Yeah. So now Q is 0, S is also 0. What will happen to P? P will become 1. Meanwhile, the other NOR gate has taken the R as 0 and the current value of P as 0, and it will also change to 1. And how much time it will take to effect these changes? After 1 tau. Right? That is, if I give this as the S and R as 0 at the time t equal 0, when initially P is 0 and Q is 0, we see that after 1 tau, that is after the propagation delay of one logic gate, right, both P and Q will be set to 1. Right? Now what will happen? Now P and Q have become 1. What will happen now? Now 1 as Q is coming as input the first NOR gate, right? Now that is 1. Now irrespective of what is the S value, now P will change to 0. And because currently P equal to 1, right, though the R is 0, right, the Q will also change to 0, right? So basically, after another 1 tau, right, both P and Q are becoming 0, right? And this continues for every 1 tau. So after 1 tau, it will be P equal to 1, Q equal to 1. After 2 tau, it's P equal to 0 and Q equal to 0. And again, we are back to the initial state that we started with. Then after 3 tau, again, it will be P equal to 1 and Q equal to 1. After 4 tau, it will be P equal to 0 and Q equal to 0, right? So this is what is known as the oscillating state of the circuit. Right? Because the output Q of the circuit keeps changing between 0 and 1 with a period of 1 tau, right? And typically, we will not be interested in circuit behaving like this, right? That's why, and all of this is happening because at some point of time we made S equal to 1 and R equal to 1, and if that leads to P equal to 0, Q equal to 0, subsequently when you change the set and reset inputs to 0, right, it will lead to this oscillating condition, which is not a desirable condition, right? So what are the desirable conditions? Only when S equal to 1 and R equal to 0, or S equal to 0 and R equal to 1, or S equal to 0 and R equal to 0. So the undesirable condition is when S equal to 1 and R equal to 1. So we can say that the desirable input combination is when the product of S and R inputs is 0, right? Because when will be S and R will be 0? Either S is 0 or R is 0, or both of them are 0, right? And when SR equal to 1, right, then it's a desirable input, and we have to make sure that whenever we are using this circuit, right, we have to ensure that the combination of S and R equal to 1 will never occur, because there is a potential for it to lead to the oscillating condition. Okay, so this is what is referred to as the basic circuit known as the set reset flip flop, right? Typically referred to as the SR flip flop. And what I wanted to make note of is the main operations of this. By making the S input to 1 and R input to 0, we can set the state of the flip flop to 1. By making S equal to 0 and R equal to 1, we can reset the state of flip flop to 0. And by making the S equal to 0 and R equal to 0, we can retain the state of the flip flop without changing the output of the flip flop. It may be 0 or 1, right? Whatever is the current state of the flip flop will continue to be the state of the flip flop when the S equal to 0 and R equal to 0, right? But it has got this undesirable condition of the S equal to 1 and R equal to 1 leading to the unstable states. We'll be seeing that some slight changes in this circuit will prevent us to have a circuit that go into the oscillating state. Now I'll just redraw this circuit in a form that is more easy to follow. So I just put 2 OR gates sorry, two NOR gates, one below another. All right, and then here's the first NOR gate, external input is OR. The second NOR gate, external input is 0. Right, and you can easily verify that this is nothing but a cross-coupled connection where the output of one NOR gate feeds as input to the other NOR gate. Right, and the output of the second NOR gate is actually what is called the Q, and the output of the first NOR gate here is what we used to call as P. Right, now we can say that it is the Q bar with the condition that SR equal to 0 will be maintained. Right, so it's basically the same circuit. We have seen that now this is the gate 1, this is the gate 2. Right, I have just read on the circuit in this fashion. This is the gate 1 and this is the gate 2. Right, and this is the more commonly used diagram of the flip-flop circuit. Right, and whenever this S input is set to 1, the state of the circuit will be set to 1. Whenever R is 1 and S is 0, the state of the circuit will be reset to 0. When S is 0 and R is 0, whatever is the Q and Q bar that will be there will be maintained, and it has to ensure that the product of SR is always 0. Right, so this is what is called the SR flip-flop. Okay, are there any questions about this? So basically we see that one feedback connection between the gates will help us to incorporate this memory characteristic of the circuit. What I'm going to do is I'll give a slightly modified version of this circuit, right, that will lead to another type of flip-flop. Before you come to the next class, I want to just analyze this circuit. It builds on the SR flip-flop that you have seen. Okay, yeah, now this R and S inputs will come from the outputs of two AND gates, where one of the inputs for this first AND gate is what is called as K input, and the other one is what is called the J input. Maybe I'll just redraw this. Okay, now the second input is going to be another feedback connection. So we see that the Q goes as input to the AND gate, right, and as you can guess, the Q bar output will go as input to the second AND gate, and outputs of these AND gates go as the R and S inputs of the SR flip-flop. This is what is referred to as the JK flip-flop. Okay, so what I want you to do before you come to the next class is what will happen to these outputs, right, when J equal to 1 and K equal to 0, and when J is 0 and K equal to 1, J equal to 0 and K equal to 0, and finally when both J and K are equal to 1, right? So I want to tell me, or if you want, I'll retain this as P itself, right? So I want to tell me what will be P and what is Q for each of these cases. Okay. Yeah, maybe I leave it at this point, but please make sure that you understand the operation of this SR flip-flop, which is the set reset flip-flop. And once you understand that, that forms the basic building block for the construction of the JK flip-flop, because we're building upon that, right? And now I want you to analyze the circuit to determine what will be the outputs P and Q for the different combinations of the inputs. So we'll see that there is a very interesting property this JK flip-flop will have. Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll stop at this point. Are there any questions? Okay, if there are no questions, I think we'll stop here and we'll meet at 9 o'clock tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, bye.